Here are the mistakes that first-time landlords make when they just inherited a property. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, and I'm going to guide you through the process of should you keep your inherited property and rent it out, or should you sell it to an investor or list it with a realtor? Let's get started. The number one mistake that first-time landlords make is renting it out to a friend or family member. Let's say you just inherited a property, you have your own property, you're renting, and you're like, you know what? Let me make some extra income, but let me rent it out to a friend. Maybe he needs a hand, or a family member that doesn't have a place to stay. What often happens in these situations, because for whatever reason, your friends and family aren't going to take you as seriously as a stranger. So the friend and family is going to move into the property, and let's say they decide not to pay rent. And what are you going to do about it, right? They're a friend, they're a family member, and you're afraid to offend them. So now you're stuck with a situation where rent is not getting paid. And especially if there's a mortgage, you are liable to pay that mortgage. If you do rent to a friend or family member, make sure that everything is in writing. So if you evict them, the process is smoother and straight to the point. Yes, I've seen friends and family have to get evicted. I've even seen a mother-in-law having to get evicted. So make sure you do it correctly. The second mistake that people make is assuming that the property is in good condition. Let's say you inherited the property, and from an eye test, the property looks like there's no issues. It's in good condition. So you move somebody into the property and something happens, such as the roof falls in or they trip going up the stairs. You are the landlord, and now you are liable for that, and you can definitely be sued. If you just inherited a property, make sure that all the repairs are done, even renting to friends and family. You'd be surprised when a friend and family members knows they can get one up on you, they might just take advantage of you. Number 3, always verify who you're renting to. Make sure you follow all the processes before you let them into your property, such as proof of funds, have references, do a background check. Okay, just because somebody sounds nice doesn't mean they're a nice person. The worst thing that could happen is you rent to a professional renter that knows the law. They take advantage of you, and now you're in a legal battle of 6 to 8 months, and the rent is not being paid. And again, if you have a mortgage on that, you still have to pay that mortgage, even if the tenant is not paying their rent. Luckily, we live in a landlord-friendly state, but if you're in another state, this might be dragged on for a longer period of time. Number 4, and I see this happen all the time, is let's say the mortgage is $1,200 a month and you're renting the property out for $1,500 a month. So you're like, you know what? Every month I'm going to receive an extra $200, and you start living off of that. Do not live off that money. Keep it in an account for the property. Contrary to popular belief, in order to get cash flow from rentals, you have to have a volume of rentals. If you just have one property, one bad thing can happen. Let's say you have to replace the HVAC, foundation, roof, plumbing, etc., and that $200 is out the window. Matter of fact, most people I talk to are not making a profit on just one rental. So keep that money for safety in case you have to repair on the property. Number 5, do not self-evict. Let's say you get in a situation where maybe you have a squatter, a renter that's no longer paying rent, and you take it into your hands, and let's say you show up threatening them to leave, or you try to put roaches or rats into the property or rodents to force them to leave. You try to use scare tactics. Those are all illegal. If you have to evict a tenant, you have to go through the legal route, and it's going to take anywhere from 30 to 60 days, and it's going to cost you anywhere from $2,500 and below to hire an attorney or to hire an eviction specialist. And speaking of that, just a side note, if you have to decide between hiring an attorney or hiring an eviction specialist, I highly recommend going through an attorney that specializes in evictions. The reason for that, an attorney is going to know the law a little bit better. An eviction specialist is usually somebody who has a background in law, a background in real estate, or maybe a paralegal. And sure, they know the law, but if something happens that's outside their experience, you've paid all this money. And the thing about evictions, if not done right before the judge, they can reject your case and you might have to start over. The last eviction we did, it took 90 days to evict that person because the seller did not have a written lease. This was with a mother-in-law that I just mentioned. Imagine if we would have got to that 90 days and have to start all over. Now you've had 6 months of dealing with this tenant and there was a mortgage on that property. So just imagine that. And number 6, do not treat this as a hobby. Landlording is an actual business. There's actual laws, there's contracts that you have to abide by or it will hurt you in the long run. Now, should you rent out the property or should you sell it to an investor or list it with a realtor? So, in order to determine if you should rent out the property, you need to answer these questions. Has the property been properly repaired? If so, if not, do you have the money to properly fix up the property? Now, it doesn't have to be, now the fixes do not have to be fancy schmancy, but they do have to meet market standard. A good standard to go by is, would you live in that property? There's no need to be a slumlord. Another question you need to ask yourself is, do you have enough money to maintain the property? Insurance, taxes, mortgage, if there is one that needs to be paid by you, can you afford to pay that in the event that the tenant does not pay the rent? Those are questions you have to ask yourself. I highly recommend hiring a property manager, but if there's not enough room for you to pay the property manager and to make income off the property, that can be a challenge. You do not want to be called at 2 a.m. and a tenant has an emergency. Once we had an Airbnb once we were in the Airbnb business and we had a tenant in our property and there was a flood underneath the floors, right? It was leaking underneath the floors and we had to get that tenant out there, refund their money and get them into a different Airbnb. Imagine dealing with that situation if you were on vacation, you were at dinner, whatever the case. It is a headache. Make sure you're prepared for it. And just side note, the money is made in the equity. Usually when you're a landlord, you're not going to be making that much money monthly. The money is going to be made in the equity from holding the property. Now, to answer the question, should you sell the property? If you're not able to answer those questions, like I mentioned, regarding keeping the property, then I highly recommend you simply sell the property. Get rid of it. It's going to be a headache, especially if you don't have experience. If you have experience, it's going to be a little easier. But if you don't, just sell the property. Take that money, you can invest in something else, and you can still keep that money and keep the legacy. Right? You can invest in something else that will appreciate, and you can still keep the family legacy. However, if you're looking to get into real estate and this is going to be your first one, you're going to get a second, third, fourth, fifth, then go ahead, take the risk as long as you are ready and prepared. And lastly, should you list it with a realtor or should you sell it yourself? The reason you want a realtor is so they can tell you the value of that property. Now, with the question of should you sell the property yourself or should you list it with a realtor? I made a video for you. Please watch that video and it's going to answer your questions.